All right, I think we are ready to go. So without further ado, Stonelegh's Deputy Director, Marie Williams.
Thank you, Mark. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Marie Williams, and I am Deputy Director at the Stoneleigh Foundation. For those of you who are not familiar with Stoneleigh, we're a Philadelphia-based foundation working to improve the life outcomes of our community's young people by advancing change within, alongside, and outside of systems that serve them. We award fellowships to exceptional leaders who enhance how systems work together, improve practice, shift narratives, and generate new knowledge through action-oriented research. During today's event, which we're honored to co-host with the Family Justice Clinic at Temple Law and Philly Voice for Change, our esteemed speakers will discuss a new framework for community-driven advocacy that is rooted in the principles of liberation movement building and community lawyering. We're especially pleased at Stoneleigh to be co-hosting this conversation in a time when multiple competing crises and priorities can cause us to lose focus on perennial and long-standing challenges that we have yet to meaningfully address as a society. At Stoneleigh, we believe deeply that the issue you'll hear about today is one such challenge. Finally, one quick note on logistics before we get into the meat of the conversation. We're going to leave ample time at the end of the webinar for audience questions. So if you'd like to submit a question anytime, at any time throughout the event, please do so by clicking the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. With that, I'd like to turn it over to today's speakers. They will each introduce themselves more fully, but we're honored to have with us today Sarah Katz, Stoneleigh Fellow and Clinical Professor of Law at Temple University, and April Lee and Yolanda Houston, who are co-founders of Philly Voice for Change. Welcome, Sarah, April, Yolanda.
Thank you so much, Marie.
Mhm.
I'm so excited to be here to share this presentation today, particularly to share the virtual stage with my friends and comrades, April Lee and Yolanda Houston. Um, One of the really exciting parts of my fellowship is that a lot of the work that I've been doing as part of the fellowship has happened in parallel to the work that April and Yolanda have been doing, and then has happened together. And we've had the opportunity to really meaningfully collaborate and share. And so it feels just right to be to be able to come together and share some of this information. um, one just little note, the law professor has to quibble. I don't think that what we're talking about today is really a new framework, but rather a framework that is truly rooted in principles that come from our liberation movements, that come from liberation movements for Black liberation, for Black feminism, for queer liberation, as well as other social justice movements over time. And so a lot of it is really actually a coming back and getting rooted in what it means to have a framework that is rooted in justice and freedom and liberation. And that's what we'll be talking about today. We said before we get started that we would each introduce ourselves a little bit beyond just our titles and and the roles we fulfill. I have been doing work in and around the child welfare system, or what we will be talking about is the family policing system, and we'll explain why in a moment. For most of my career, I went to law school after a few years of working as a community organizer. And my very first summer after my first year of law school, I had an internship working in a child advocacy office. And that was the summer that ignited my rage, honestly, about what I experienced and what I saw in in New York's family policing system. Because what I saw was a system that was entirely filled by Black and Brown families. They were the only families I saw in Manhattan Family Court that summer. Um, And the racialized impact couldn't be more stark because all the white people were the lawyers and the social workers or case managers. Working in a child advocacy office, we were doing a lot of the advocacy to make sure that the kids that we were representing were getting what they needed. And the reality is that at the time nobody was doing the same thing for the parents. And so that launched what has now been a well over 20-year journey of advocacy and work in this space. I started my career after law school as a family defense attorney at Community Legal Services, and then almost 14 years ago left to become a clinical professor at Temple Law, where for most of that time I've taught and directed a general family law clinic. Um, but the impetus to seek out the funding for my fellowship project that I'll talk about today was really two things. One was seeing that there was an ever-growing family-led movement to really radically change the family policing system and wanting to kind of figure out how my teaching and my advocacy could be more grounded in that. Um, and then kind of a sneaking suspicion, which I'll talk about more as we get along, that I, in my role as a legal advocate and a legal educator, may be contributing to the problem rather than helping solve the problem, even as we've been talking about all of the harms and problems with the family policing system over the last couple decades. So really it was a question of, you know, what am I going to do about it? And this fellowship has been the answer. But I'll stop there and turn things over to April and then Yolanda to introduce themselves.
Hey family, I'm April Lee, co-founder of Philly Voice, and I'm excited to be here today. It's a few things that pulled me into this work. First, as an impacted parent, I've been through the system myself, cross system impacted, and it really started with the question of me after I lost my children, like how did I get there, right? How did I go from the community member, leader, and all these things to being like engulfed in the system. And when I answered those questions for myself, that kind of led me on my advocacy journey, right? And I realized how many different systems touch my life throughout my entire life, from a child on to adulthood, and also what was needed, what was lacking, what was missing, right? So that kind of led me into my advocacy activist mode, which led me to working at community legal services as well as the first peer advocate in entirety of Pennsylvania, helping other parents navigate what I have been through and navigate some of those other systems. That turned into me being the first non-attorney director within community legal services, right? To really implement impact the voice throughout every stage of advocacy. At the same time, I was doing work with the Philadelphia Department of Public Health as a community engagement specialist, um, looking at and developing programs surrounding the overdose deaths in Philadelphia, particularly in the Black community. Like understanding, going back to all of how different systems have touched my life, we really do look at the intersectionality of it all, which kind of led into the work that we're doing at Philly Voice, right? Working within and outside of multiple conglomerate nonprofits within um, the child welfare system, outside the child welfare system, and other systems. I realized that it was going to kind of take us to help us at the end of the day, and that I had to look at uh, things differently. We have to build things differently. Very much so. It's frustrating because it's a worthiness test when it comes down to just giving people the necessities that they need, giving them the support that they need. And those worthiness tests is really what led us into building an organization that we have. Right. It was frustrating, although, yes, I was changing lives and helping people as best as I could, but I still couldn't help them the way that I wanted to. And I still couldn't help myself in certain areas just because you have these worthiness tests when it comes down to our communities. So that's kind of what led me to this work, and it just so happens that we collaborate with Sarah often, and that's someone we love we love dearly, and I'm grateful that our paths have crossed. And I'll pass it off to Yolanda.
Hello, everyone. I'm Yolanda Houston, as you heard, co-founder of Philly Voice. Um, when I think about what brought me to this work, it was a long path, an interesting path. I'm an attorney here in Philadelphia. I started out as a business attorney doing mergers and acquisitions, at which point I was also a foster parent. And I actually, prior to being an attorney, had to choose between fostering and taking the bar exam. And as a result, I chose the bar exam because I thought it was more appropriate in order to raise a family. And that's when I first interacted with making a choice that was not compliant with the child welfare system. Fast forward, working attorney, I actually ended up becoming kinship for a relative of mine. And going in court and seeing how she was represented led me to becoming an advocate, a court appointed attorney in Philadelphia. While as a court appointed attorney, I worked both as a child advocate and a parent advocate. Over the next, say, 12 to 14 years, I worked in that role, but I also worked with another. I became completely nonprofit. I became a complete parent advocate working for another organization within Philadelphia, and realized that even though I was making a change within the lives of parents, I was also leaving out the children that I had mentored on through that practice, but also realized that as an attorney for a firm, it was certain things that I could not do that I saw needed to happen. And working with and Philly Voice, in developing Philly Voice, I was able to do things as a mentor, leaving my title behind and becoming part of the community in which I wanted to see impact and have change. So working for Philly Voice and developing what we do here has been fulfilling to me. And working with Sarah allowed me to become a community member, and let Temple do the legal side. And I can just become an advocate and work side by side within our community, removing the title.
Great. So moving us along into our discussion today, I mean, the racialized impact of the family policing system is not in doubt, right? The question is more, what are we going to do about it? Or how might we approach that, how we see it as a problem. I want to spend a second just to say why we're calling this the family policing system, which for some people will be a new term and for others will be very familiar. The term family policing is used by Professor Dorothy Roberts in her scholarship, in her books, and by many advocates and many families, because it more accurately describes the experience that families have of surveillance and punishment from what we would otherwise call the child welfare system. And because the framework that we're talking about today really is grounded from the community's perspective, we want to make sure to honor that lived experience. With regard to the racialized impact, as I said, it's not really up for debate. 1 in 10 of all Black children in this nation experience family separation as a result of the family policing system. 1 in 41 Black children lose their rights to their parents as a result of family policing intervention. Black children represent only 14% of the total population of children in this country, and yet nationally, they're 22% of the foster care population. The reality is in Philly, where the number of Black children is about 40-something%, about 65% of the families involved in dependency court are Black families. So we know that there is a racialized impact, but these statistics don't even really begin to tell the actual story or the actual lived experience of the families that are being impacted. because they only provide a bird's eye view. Um, and for each of these families, each child is a family's entire universe. And so family policing's impact reverberates not just within the immediate family, for the immediate child and parent, but also for the entire broader family, um, their the entire family, their entire community, but also intergenerationally and over time. And so the questions that we want to get at as we talk about the framework and the work that we're each doing in our individual organizations and together is meant to really go deeper. As our comrade and friend Corey Best writes in a newly published book, who are we protecting? Whose safety, right? And so I ask these questions. What do we believe, right? Do we believe that the harm of family separation, because we know it causes harm, right? We know that we are causing harm to the child, to the parent. Do we believe the harm of family separation is worth it? And this is a very current conversation in the world of immigration, but this is, of course, what happens every day in family policing. Do we believe that foster care creates safety? Right? I'm not gonna, we can come back to it, but we know that kids are actually often abused and mistreated in the foster care system. So why do we hang on to the idea that foster care creates safety? But most importantly, and I think this is the question I hope we'll keep coming back to, what do we need to believe about families and their relationships, their love, to believe that family separation and termination of parental rights is required? And I hope that's a question you'll just kind of take with you through our presentation, but also after today. Pass it off to April.
Yeah, and in order to figure out what you believe, we must first listen to what families are saying about the family policing system. Listen to what we are saying, so to speak, right? And oftentimes, systems of care do not feel safe for our community. They are often attached to punitive systems, punitive responses, right? I don't believe you as a parent, right? I don't believe that my children being removed out of my home is in the best care of my family and the best care of me. We often see that with the families that we serve and throughout all the work that we do, that harm continues, right? Most people think um, the traumatic effect of family separation only happens at a certain point of a case. Like, but it happens at an investigation. It happens when you're in a hospital after you gave birth, and now you're talking to someone who may take your baby away from you out of your arms as you just had it. You also see on the other side of that domestic violence survivors who are fleeing to get help. Very real families that we've worked with, right? Fleeing to get help and end up entangled or end up getting their children removed because they're fleeing from a certain situation, right? When we look at our scratch that, the system separates family and everything that we say. It's in the language, right? It's in children, youth, then family. We're not often treated as a whole. It often lacks humanity, right? We see in our communities alone children being removed due to structural issues in the house. I mean, we just recently had a case closed because we was able to spend $600 to alleviate a situation, right? And get the family back together. Those type of things that people on the outside who don't or might not understand family policing due to its narrative, you don't see what families are going through. And we're often not listened to. We're often not heard because of course, if a child is removed, something must be drastically wrong with that parent. You must be abusing your child, even though it's only 14% nationally, right? Something must be wrong with you in order to have your child removed. And that's just simply not the case. So, how can our communities lean on, and we don't want to like lean on these systems, even if there may be real help there. Anytime you connect or attach help to trauma or you attach help to a punitive response, I would never feel safe. Our community would never feel safe. So it's not surprising that, you know, people are not getting what they need or achieving what they need to achieve, even though some believe that these resources is out here, but our community would not use those resources if you're not trustworthy, if I can't feel safe, if you're not being family centered, if you lack humanity, which we see often, going back to those worthiness tests that I was talking about earlier on. Sarah
So
or Yolanda, y'all can add to that if I missed anything to that one.
I think you
Because y'all see a
covered it.
lot.
I think you covered it. So, what might a community-led approach to advocacy and problem solving require? Um, Honestly, in my travels, and again, I'll talk a little bit more about the fellowship project in just a minute. Um, Really, it's just listen, right? Like it's very simple. Just listen. Listen to what families are saying and act on that, not yourself, but together, right? So, to kind of frame a community-led approach to advocacy and problem solving, we broke it down into something really simple, right? First, critical connections, right? You have to form those connections, real relationships with the community that is most impacted. Um, and also sustaining those relationships. Those aren't one-offs. It's not bringing in a focus group or bringing in folks for a listening session and then that's either the end of it or maybe you bring them back at the very end. But really being in ongoing relationships. So much of what I've learned over the last couple years has happened by simply being in community with folks, right? So we're in ongoing communication, we're in ongoing relationship. That goes both ways. It's not just they're telling me what to do. We are in relationship, we are connecting, we are communicating. And that's what really sets the table for co-creating the solutions. And April's going to say a little bit more about co-creation in a second. But it means coming up with the solutions together. And what I do want to say before I pass the torch to April on this is that co-creation can apply at every level of problem solving and advocacy, whether or not we're thinking about this in terms of individual attorney-client relationships, whether we're thinking about this in terms of individual case manager and family relationships, and then it can also be more systemic or policy solutions. But I'll stop there and let April say a little bit more.
No, for sure. This is our jam. I love me
Yes.
some co-creation. Right? Because once again, is a difference, right? Often people look at co-design where you see organizations create something and then take it to the community or take it to the quote unquote impacted folks to ask your opinion, right? It's already done, right? I've already thought of the solution. I just want you to tweak it a little bit, right? That's co-design. That's not what we're talking about when we're talking about co-creation. And co-creation, it absolutely demands intentionality because you're bringing in a space, right? You're actually setting that table from scratch. You're creating that table. I'm not, you know, walking into your room or you're not coming to a table that already have been built, right? You're actually creating it with the people surrounding it, right? So you're bringing in Like those people who use the system impacted, harmed by the system, which means it's a certain type of patience and tolerance. And how do we build this together, right? What is the solution that you think? And that's the huge difference between co-creation and co-design. I do believe we don't really get anywhere, and we'll talk about that a little further in the presentation, without actually taking the time to co-create around surrounding those issues that you want the community to solve, right? You don't figure out our problems, like help them figure out their own solutions to their own problems, and it actually sticks a lot harder that way.
So one thing that's most important when ever involved in systems is one, recognize that you have to dismantle your savior complex. We all do. We all think that we're coming to this work to help individuals, when the reality is the individuals they don't need help. They know exactly what they need, and we have to understand that what they want and what they need, we have to meet them where they are and go from there and do and be guided by them. It's not about us swooping in and helping. And that's why I said I learned to remove my title, because a lot of people within the work community that we work with, if they see me as a lawyer, they see me as someone that's coming to do what someone else did before. So when I remove my title and remind them that I am part of the community, I am a mother, I am a, a worker, and I explained to them my roles that I had within in within the child welfare system, understanding that we all are here and it takes a community to make change, and therefore that what they need and what they want, I'm here to listen, I'm here to do, and I'm here to be guided by. And let them know that they're the ones that can make their difference, not me.
And don't feel bad if you do have a saviorism complex. That's something a lot of us do have, but it's about checking yourself and dismantling it. And how can I give them what they need without necessarily trying to save them? Like, go ahead, Sarah. I just had to add that
No,
in
no,
because
no,
we,
that's fine. And it's
yeah.
a nice segue right into this question of leveraging power and advantages. So, I mean, for those of us that are advantaged by whatever we're, whether it's by title, by degrees we have, whether it's by racialized identity, by whiteness, we have to be aware of our own positionality and what's walking into the room with us when we are seeking to develop relationships with the community and sustain ongoing community. And so that starts with just simply being aware of your own positionality and advantages. Because if you come in with the attitude, I'm here to help, and so my intent is, kind of, I mean, this is the flip side of that savior complex, right? Is that your intent only gets you so far, right? It's how you're showing up and how you're in relationship with folks that's actually going to matter in terms of your ability to move forward and co-create together. So, first, are you aware of your positionality and advantages? Second, what ongoing internal work are you doing to dismantle your own biases? And that really requires attentiveness. And we'll keep coming back to this because this is one of my big things, is really staying attentive and purposeful and intentional about doing that internal work to check your own biases. And particularly for me around race and whiteness, this is something that I've done a lot of work on around. It's a practice, right? It really is ongoing work and requires A, being in relationship with folks, but B, really committing to doing the ongoing work. Because by being in relationship, you're gonna get checked. It's what Adrienne Maree Brown calls loving corrections, right? Like there are gonna be times where I'm gonna slip up, but I also need to be able to hear it when I slip up and to adjust, but then also do the work to not keep making the same mistake again, right? And so that really requires an ongoing commitment to practice. How are you actively disrupting the racism and other supremacy culture? Um, I mean, this again, it's not enough to just like read the books or be able to name the harms. What are you actively doing to change it up, to not reinforce those ways of being? And then lastly, how are you using your own power and advantages to leverage and amplify marginalized voices?
So when we think about community and movement lawyering, it's important that lawyers, when we feel as though we're coming in to help the community make change, we have to recognize that we're there to assist in the change. The community members are the ones who are actually delegating and dictating what changes need to be there. We have to, as a lawyer, we understand the complexities within the system. However, at the same time, we're only providing information and letting the community know what that information is and how it is approached by legal standards and let them navigate and come up with ways to in which changes need to be made. I always say is individuals know what they're going through on the other side. We only know what goes on in the courtroom as lawyers, and we have to step back by giving them that information, but letting them dictate the way it needs to go. We have to make more room for their facts because every situation is deviated and determined by the facts of that family's circumstances. Another thing that is important, we always come together and think things need to happen in a way we believe they need to happen, and understanding that when you're in community, when you're in community, things happen according to how they should happen. First thing you have to do is build that trust within that community. And once you have that trust, you can move forward in the process of making change within the systems that your community wants to change.
Yeah. I just want to add here that I think from the lawyering piece that this is a shift in terms of maybe more traditional approaches to public interest lawyering. Certainly how I was trained a couple decades ago when I was in law school, right, was this idea that public interest lawyers are sort of well situated to identify the problems and move on the systemic solutions on behalf of the community rather than with the community, right? And the idea behind both community and movement lawyering really is that the lawyer is in community, is part of the community, right? And so the lawyer isn't the one who's deciding how to make the moves, the community is. And again, that's true whether we're thinking about it in terms of individual representation or in terms of systemic change, that it's the community that is not only naming the problems, but is actually naming the solutions. And it's the lawyer's role to figure out how do we utilize the tools of the law to help meet those goals, which really is a shift. And again, for some of us is a change from the way that we were trained or sort of brought up as lawyers.
Because we know you attorneys do think y'all know it all the time. But it really goes into the conversation that we was like having, right? You utilizing your privilege, your positionality, and your education, right? To actually allow them to come up with a solution and you fight. And Sarah, that is something, well, both Sarah and Yolanda, y'all not the normal attorneys. I like y'all. Um,
Okay.
that you guys do well. I'm serious, and that's part, and it goes into right setting that table, being in community. You must, with that intentionality, you must set that table, right? And co-creation. I'm just gonna go through this really quickly, just to give the audience an idea. One is not a microwavable process. So if you want to co-create and in the process of co-creating, right, understand that it's going to take time, right? So you might have to, well, not might, you're going to have to trust the process, right? Because nothing happens in a vacuum, right? Nothing happens quickly, right? We always lead with love and patient, right? Completely like intentional. What is the purpose of this table, right? What are we here to achieve? what issue are we looking at? We have a lot of hard-won lessons amongst ourselves of not trusting that process and not giving that space and room for grief. Those emotions are going to come up, right? The educational piece is going to come up. Not everybody um, might not understand the process or the system or even the solution or the problem that you're trying to solve, right? So look for ways to kind of step up, step back, right? And I'm not going to be on it forever, but I have to do the have humility piece, right? And the have humility, especially like for me, this is one of my things that I keep in the back of my head, and I always love to kind of use the definition that I learned, right? Humility is accepting somebody right where they're at, but it's also accepting yourself right where you're at, right? You can make mistakes, right? No human being, we're neither bad nor good. We're just human, right? And with having humility and understanding that you're just human and that you're flawed and that I might speak out of turn and I may say something that didn't sound right or might have hurt somebody's feelings, right? And in that real time, having humility and accountability to say, hey, I apologize, or I was wrong, or what you will hear further down the line, all the different pivots that Yolanda had to take, I had to take, Sarah had to take, and all our different journeys, right? Humility is one of those through lines that you must have, not just on a level of co-creation, but throughout.
Okay. So I'm realizing we've been going on, and I want to make sure that we get through, get to both talk about my fellowship, get to talk about Philly Voice, and then get to some of the other practices that we wanted to share before we get to questions. So we have a lot to accomplish in a relatively short amount of time. So I am about 2.5+ years through my 3-year senior fellowship with the Stoneleigh Foundation, which has been such an amazing opportunity to just step back from my own career and my own ways of doing things and my own ways of being and really very humbly listen and change and co-create. The title of my project was Achieving Racial Justice for Families Through Legal Education and Advocacy. And I do just want to say that as much as this has been a professional journey, it's also been an incredibly personal one. I don't think I really could have imagined that I was asking big questions, big existential questions about my own work and the work of legal advocates and legal education, that I would have to really turn on myself. And those questions at the beginning of the project were one, in what ways are legal education and advocacy replicating and entrenching the systemic racism endemic to family policing? Um, and guess what? I'm legal education. Guess what? I'm legal advocacy, right? So I really had to actually ask a different question, right? Which is, what is my role in reinforcing and replicating the systemic racism endemic to family policing? Or again, as our friend and colleague Corey Best would say, what is my role as the oppressor, right? And really, what is my complicity? And then the second question that I was asking at the beginning was, how can attorneys and legal educators effectively partner with impacted families to further racial justice in the family policing system? And I will say that honestly, as I moved into the fellowship, in my first year, a lot of what I was doing was just really building community with folks and getting to just be in the room and really listen and have conversations. And those were individual conversations and being at community meetings and going to national convenings, and just really doing some hard listening. And I realized that I got these questions wrong, and it shifted. And so this is one of those pivots that April said that we would share. And there were really three things that got me to the realization that these questions weren't really the right questions. And one was just developing and deepening my own understanding of a theory of social change, right? And the role of lawyers and law in that, because I would challenge you to point to any area of social change in our country and our society that's happened just as a result of changes to law or policy alone. Society changes because of people and people power, right? And so, for example, we wouldn't have ended legalized segregation in this country. Oh, we can have a different debate about whether we still have it, right? But we wouldn't have had a Brown versus a Board of Education if we didn't have a social movement that preceded that, right? And so we can point to any area of social change, and law is a tool, but it's not the be all and end all. The other thing was just really a very humble reckoning with what a divide there is between how lawyers may see themselves and what the community is saying about them, right? Because those same things that we started a bit with about the lack of trust, the lack of the not safe, right? Like all of those things, even with regard to the lawyers that are supposedly fighting in the trenches with the community, I was hearing a lot of those things. And one of the things that I was hearing also is that lawyers just like aren't flexible. They're set in, you know, their set of tools, their ways of being, and that was a problem. And so it really begged the question of, can lawyers stay rooted in community, right? And do this work. So the components of the project were research and scholarship, curriculum and practice tools development, and then ultimately the plan was always to launch the new family justice clinic that we have done. But as I re-envisioned the questions, the question became, how can legal education and advocacy align with and leverage the family-led movement to radically change family policing? And then how can lawyers stay rooted in community-driven advocacy as they advocate within and around harmful oppressive systems? How do we avoid replicating the same approaches, the same ways of being, the same harms that that systems do? Some of how I've moved through getting to reframing those questions and then getting to the answers have been through some intentional practices, rooted in community advocacy. So first, as we've said, developing those critical connections and sustaining community, developing these new relationships. And those have been local, like my work with April and Yolanda and with others here in Philadelphia. But also nationally. It's also been through what's called participatory law scholarship. And participatory law scholarship is legal scholarship that is co-created with individuals who have been impacted by the legal systems that we're talking about. And so April and I had an opportunity to co-create an article together. But some of the other work that I've gotten to do, the article that I co-created with Corey Best, although she's an academic, the piece that I wrote with Talid Al-Sabai, she's also a harm reduction activist and an expert, and then an ongoing participatory research project on community-led lawyering that April and Yolanda are involved with, and others, that is ongoing, and will hopefully produce something toward the end of my fellowship. Another piece of this has just been using my own role and access to resources at the law school, and access to various spaces to amplify impacted family voices. And that's happened through both organizing and hosting conferences and other events at the law school, as well as arranging for workshops and other speaking opportunities. And, that helps change the conversation, right? We are bringing voice, and so I've really tried to move in such a way that I'm never doing anything where impacted voices are not part of the discussion, part of how we are moving forward. And that helps change things, including hosting the Philly Voice for Change launch and conference last February. Really, really quickly, the result of all of this has been actually two new course offerings. One is the Policing Families Seminar, which is a writing seminar, which is a really deep dive into racism, and the law in the area of family policing. And students take that alongside or in advance of taking the Family Justice Clinic, which is our new clinic, which advocates in partnerships and solidarity with families whose stability or integrity has been impacted by state intervention. And so, I mean, you can read our mission statement, but again, the focus is to advocate that all of the advocacy that we are doing seeks to prevent or attempt to repair the harms of family policing or other state intervention while promoting racial justice and family preservation. And we're doing that in a way that means that we're both advocating alongside families who are actively experiencing these systems now, but hopefully in a way that creates opportunities to empower those families, not just to advocate for themselves, but creates roots to be involved in other sorts of advocacy. And so that means that the range of different kinds of legal work that we're doing within the clinic ranges from individual legal advice and representation to also systemic advocacy projects. The students have been amazing. We were piloting the model last academic year. This year, we're fully launched into the Family Justice Clinic. And the students have just brought incredible energy and curiosity and imagination. They've really helped us develop this incredibly. And I will turn things over to April and Yolanda to talk about Philly Voice for Change.
Absolutely. Thanks, Sarah. I so enjoy seeing your students. That just warmed my heart. As much work as we do at when it came down to us creating Philly Voice, we really started off with a question, right? We thought that we was going to create a parenting coalition, right? Like we need parent voice, across Philadelphia. Once again, I was like the only peer advocate and was kind of treated like a unicorn. And I'm like, no, I know thousands of me, right? I know plenty of people in my community that want to be involved, that want to get up, that want to do something. And it's time for our voices to be heard. So Yolanda and I really did go in kind of gung-ho with one plan, um, and that this was going to be a parenting coalition, right? But going on to ask our communities, right? Like, what would it look like if you had your own nonprofit, right? And that morphed into so much other, going back to having that ability to pivot. So even though we thought in our mind, this is what this is going to be, Sarah, next slide. Um, you know, we're going to have a parenting coalition. We're going to build this coalition up, and they're going to fight across the city. If parents' voices is going to be everywhere, and it just wasn't that, right? We learned really early on what they wanted, and we were committed to what they want, which calls for some creative thinking, a lot of humility going back to that, and like really pivoting ourselves to meet the community where they at. And even though and although I was an impacted and am an impacted individual, even my voice didn't matter in that space, right? Yolanda's voice didn't necessarily matter in that space. We really acted as facilitators for them to completely build up what is now Philly Voice. And they still lead us, right? I get humbled a lot with certain things that I may, you know, want to go with or do, but I'm grateful for that pivot and I'm grateful for what has come out of that. So we're going to just like flow through a little bit of how we came to be and some of our principles and things that we stand on at Philly Boys.
Okay. So one thing that we stand on in Philly Voice is community leadership, understanding that everyone in every program we do within Philly Voice is delegated and selected by the community. We have a vote for everything we do. We don't move forward until we have a consensus with our community members. Uh, We allow the lived experience. They're the experts in their story. They determine how we want things to be changed. A lot of people, when we're working within the organization, like within our nonprofit, a lot of people see titles are they should have the biggest voices, and we always remind them your title means nothing here. You're a community member, and what you know that has worked for you and your organization does not matter. What works for the families and what they're saying is what's necessary to shape what we're doing. Their lived experiences makes all those differences. And we always remember that we are non-punitive. We're a non-punitive support system. We actually hear what's going on. We're not going to seek, we're going to make sure whenever we give community resources to those in the community, we always think of ways that they will not be surveilled or receive any type of punitive measures. We try to figure out how we can work within with as I always say is in our old school methods in which the community or the village helps the families get where they need to do. So our guiding principles is always to make sure that everyone that comes in into our community understands they're part of a larger village and a larger support system. And it's important to understand what our community means to us as we do this. We understand that, Sarah, can you, thank you. We understand that we have a relationship without titles, which is why I said we always drop the titles. One thing I know that people are more comfortable when we break bread. Every meeting we have within the community when we're making decisions, we actually just make sure that everyone is having a home cooked meal, that they're comfortable, and that they understand that whatever they say and their voice matters. We also try to figure out what supports they need. A lot of people say, well, we can support families here and there, but we ask them specifically, what tangible supports do you need? And how can we make sure you get those things? In addition, we try to make sure that we all understand that we all have biases, but it's important to understand that we have to put our biases to the side to support individuals. Um, and I think it's kind of interesting when we people think about it. You'll see yourself as what you believe is best for this family, understanding you don't know what's best. You only know what's best, what you believe is best for you. You can never know what's best for someone else. So check those biases, put them to the side, and understand that the family knows what's best for them.
Absolutely. And all of those things that we're talking about came out of those community meetings we were talking about, came out of us building, and we asked them some really like straightforward questions. We have retreats, we have chat and choose, and like all of these different things to completely build because we wanted every part and every aspect of Philly Voice to be impacted led, impacted built, kind of by us for us type. And we asked them like, what are our share values, right? What is missing? What do we have, and what don't we have? And these are the things that kind of shocked and surprised us, that made us pivot. Because once again, where we were thinking it was one thing, they're like, well, actually, no, we don't have a lot of support for this. I need this, I need that, I need this, which led us into like making sure tangible resources and some of those very things, which you will see, and I'm going to blow past these slides a little quickly. Like some of those things were completely incorporated in every program and form of advocacy that we do, right? We needed concrete needs and tangible resources, and families listed out what they actually needed. And a lot of times, going back to that worthiness test, right? If you needed a certain resource, you might have to fill out this paperwork. You might have to be 200% below poverty in order to get this resource, or 150% below poverty. Like, all right, do you own your home? Do you rent your home? Like, it's a lot of hoops that one may have to go through just for resources. But we kind of roll up our sleeve and pull our own resources at times. Like some of the photos that you guys are seeing is me reaching out to hotels and them saying, yep, you can have all of these TVs and this stuff. And we give it directly to our community, just to keep in mind, like anything that they ask us to do. Because one of the things that always will stick out from our very first meeting is a lady that said, I don't want to start something that y'all not going to finish. We have people take our information all the time and do absolutely nothing with it, and she's still a part to this day. But we kind of hold on to that in every aspect of what we learn and continue to learn along the way, excuse me, is added and incorporated into all of our processes.
Yeah,
Sarah?
one of the things that we had learned from our community was men are always forgotten about. Whenever we think about making system changes, everybody's always helping the women, but what about the men? And here are things that the men have requested. So when we say that the Philly Voice, we support all entire community, both men and women alike.
Yeah, and
And
I
this is how
love
we
one of the
support them.
things that the men had, like on the what do men need, actually helped us to develop part of our family aligned mentorship program that is now up and running, and we have mentees throughout the city. One of the guys said, I want a one-stop shop. Like I got girls, I don't know how to deal when they menstrues come on. Like I don't know. Like I just got my daughters back and don't know how to even begin to navigate that piece, right? Right. And we took that in along with a lot of other information and created family aligned mentorship. And it's really just pairing families with other families who've been through the similar situations to help them navigate cross systems issues. So that can look like maybe I'm helping someone just go through, the family policing system, or maybe dad just needs some extra resources because he don't know what to do with the girls, or maybe you have a teenager who's a bit much at times and like just need someone to connect to. So we look at the entire family and not breaking it up as a unit, because often what we see, especially when it comes down to services in people homes, is normally focused in on one or the other. Yolanda always talked about, like, well, this one child is in care, but there's three other children in the home that can't get those resources because they're not connected to this. So those are the things that we kind of like look at and that our mentors do. We show up in a very real way. And once again, you're connected with people who have been through the same thing. So that support looks differently. And at the end of the day, is really just building that village surrounding that family to the point to where they feel stabilized. We don't have a time limit on it. When you done, you done. Like if you need me real quick, then you get me real quick. If you need someone to stay on longer, then that's what it's going to be. It's really completely guided by them. One of the other programs that came out of our community members was our press program, providing resource to elevate self-success. And this program is almost like a brain baby of mine. We was raising funds for our launch, and we were doing cups and all of these different things. And I had a few guys who had just were formerly incarcerated, and they was working for me to help me put together all of this material. But as they was putting together the material for our launch and I'm paying them and we're having these very real conversations, I realized like that's what's needed. When the guy came back the next day and like, hey, I bought my daughter some diapers. Right? Just the smallest of things can change someone's life. And I remember not having those basic necessities, right? Not having any type of pocket money, or not having anywhere that I can go that was positive and reaffirming and you know taught me how to like develop my own income. So that's what press does. We have professional development through creativity, entrepreneurship. We also have connected to other jobs and resources and things like that. But they get paid same day pay for people early in recovery and people formerly incarcerated. My apologies for blowing through, but I know we're getting on time. And Sarah, I can pass it on.
Um, yeah, so I mean, I think we'll be brief about this, but as we sort of started with, we have had lots of opportunities to find ways to collaborate. And in many ways, April and Yolanda's vision for really being rooted in community care, and the vision that I've developed for the Family Justice Clinic in conjunction with community members have really come together quite nicely. And so some of the ways in which we've collaborated are doing community law clinics at various locations in the community together, where folks can access resources through Philly Voice and meet individually with my law students and other legal providers to get direct legal information, or in some situations, legal advice or representation. Additionally, my students have worked with Philly Voice members and April and Yolanda to develop or are developing community legal education materials that will get done soon and get out there. But really the goal of both the community law clinics and the community legal education materials is the same, which is to start putting the information in the hands of the community. So often I think we as lawyers think that we kind of own the law and end up as gatekeepers to who has the access to the information, but we can do a lot to help build up the community's knowledge, not just for themselves, but to help support each other and in their awareness in this work. And so also in conjunction with that, we've done various trainings and workshops for community members, for other sorts of social service providers, or for attorneys and other legal workers, and we'll continue to do that. We've also been able to collaborate on various systemic advocacy. One very concrete thing is that there is now pending a reinstatement of parental rights bill that was introduced by State Representative Rick Krajewski, HB 133. The work on this bill was entirely done by members of Philly Voice and other community members that came to community listening sessions that were hosted at Temple Law School, but were facilitated by April and Yolanda. And community members actually really came and stated what they needed from this bill. There were very few lawyers in the room. I was one of them, but we took what was recommended, what was said, and community members actually rewrote a version of the bill, and that's what was introduced and is pending in the state legislature right now. And both April and I had the opportunity to travel with members of Philly Voice and some of my students to testify in the Children and Youth Committee on that bill. We've got some other systemic advocacy projects brewing. We want to end with talking a little bit about some of the intentional practices that we've gleaned from the work that we're doing, and that we believe others can incorporate into what they're doing, no matter where you are doing this work. And I want to start by just kind of flagging like the term intentional practices. We choose that with intention, with purpose, as opposed to the term best practices, which is so often used. There are two problems with referring to best practices. And one is that it becomes the roof, right? It's like, okay, we're doing this thing, that's the best practice, and there's no room for growth or change within that, right? And the second, or maybe just another way to describe it, is it becomes a checkbox. We've been trained in this, we're doing this, and so, okay, we've done it. But the whole idea is these are practices, right? Which means we keep doing them, and we keep practicing, and we keep practicing. And we approach that with humility and with the capacity and with curiosity and with imagination, right? With the opportunity to keep changing. And so that really lays the groundwork to reinforce ways of being that can create the kind of change, the transformative change that we wish to see. I very purposely have this all over the slide in no particular hierarchical order. I will say I think that all of them are grounded in an attachment to justice and liberation. All of these practices so justice and liberation is our North Star. But it really becomes a question of what are we working in service of? Are we working in service of ourselves, our careers, our professional titles, or are we attached to something larger than that? And I'd like to think that we're all attaching to something larger than that. And when we don't, I think it can breed complacency. So what we'll do on this slide is each just talk about a couple of the intentional practices and what they mean to us respectively, and then we will open it up for some questions before we wrap today. So first, I want to grab from our grab bag radical love, radical empathy, and solidarity. And I really see solidarity as another way of saying love, right? And so I'd ask you to take stock of what are the stories we are telling ourselves in order to justify our roles, our professional roles. And how many of those stories are rooted in supremacy ideology, in carceral logic, and anti-Blackness that we purport to be against, right? I mean, I doubt most of us would say, oh, I believe in supremacy ideology. But the reality is, when we orient ourselves to love, to truly radical love, we challenge ourselves to break down these mental barriers and really define who's the us and who's the them, right? Many of our professional roles reinforce this hierarchy, right? The notion of attorney client, social worker, case manager, and client. And when we approach those very same relationships, rooting ourselves in solidarity, rooting ourselves in love, rooting ourselves in radical empathy, we really redefine not just what the relationship is or may look like, but also what is possible to come out of that relationship. So I'll leave you with that. I think the other practices that I want to grab just to flag are the practices around humility and resisting supremacy and carceral logic and committing to the self-work. And I talked about this a bit before, but this has to be an ongoing practice. And it can only happen in a meaningful way if we are in relationship with folks within the communities that we, again, that savior complex that we claim that we wish to help, but it can only happen both through being in community and to really committing ourselves to doing the work, doing the deep and sometimes painful work of rooting out the ways in which we recreate oppressive ways of being. I will stop there. And actually, I'm not sure if Yolanda or April wants to jump in.
Yeah, for me, I'm gonna let you close it out, April, for us. But for me, the two things that popped out for me was leveling the playing field. Um, and the reason why I said that pops out to me is because it's important, I believe, when working with the community that everyone knows their rights. By knowing their rights, we're able to level the playing fields when individuals within these cross systems approach. And then also allows them to, by being community with these individuals and having community resources available and community partners, we're able to have them, they're able to call who they need to call and have a question answered right at the moment that they need it. And I also think it's important to understand the how to prevent and repair harm, along with transparency and accountability. We all know that the system causes harm based on what our community is telling us. We can hold the system accountable for the harm they have caused, recognize those issues that have taken place, and also take those issues when working with the families to repair the harm that it caused. Um, and making sure that if we can prevent any harm in the future, we're able to do so by letting them know what to expect, when to expect it, and how to navigate. Go ahead, April.
And I think I'm going to end you guys off with imagination, because so much of what's possible is through imagination, right? We can build even what we want to see, what we don't want to see, right? We can pull in to that, right, by building communities of care and systems of true care, by fostering spaces to build up individuals. We've seen firsthand what the community can do with the resources given, but we can't begin to do any of this work if we lack the imagination to see an alternative way of doing things, especially when it comes down to bolstering up our communities of care. And we're gonna open it up.
Yeah, so we'll move it to questions and we'll circulate these materials so people have our contact information, but I'm gonna stop the share just so that we don't need to have this um, up and we can open it up for questions.
Perfect. So my name is Mark Huck. I'm a program officer at the Stoneleigh Foundation. I'm going to be assisting with Q&A today. We've got about 15 to 20 minutes or so for questions. Please, we've got many questions to answer, but if you haven't asked your question yet already, please do so. Even if we aren't able to get your question today, we can share it with the speakers after the fact. So please feel free to still submit your questions, even if we aren't able to get to it. And please include your name and organization when you can to make it easier for speakers to respond to your question either now or after the fact. So I know we've had a lot of conversation today, a lot of fantastic things. Some of these questions were submitted a little earlier. So if I ask you a question and you feel you've already answered it sufficiently, just let me know. So first question today comes from Keisha Brown saying, April, can you talk more about the worthiness test experience and how it impacts you personally, professionally, and legally?
Oh, absolutely. I did answer part of that, right? In order to get a resource, you have to fit within a certain metrics. You have to fit within a certain medium as a family. And that's something both personally and professionally, right, that people have to go through. Oftentimes, even if you are within that metric, what we see sometimes is the personality issues, right? You got to be liked to get a resource, or you have to know someone who knows someone to have that resource, right? It shouldn't depend on um, your status, background, or any of that if you need a resource, regardless of how much or how little you have. Like, you could be out of poverty and still have a really hard day and need to connect to something. So that's one of the things that we try to cut off. Like, we don't capture those type of metrics. If you're in need, you're in need, plain and simple. But that's what I was talking about when it comes down to worthiness tests. Not everyone get the same treatment and not everyone receive the same resources.
Excellent. Thank you. Next question, I'll lightly paraphrase some of these, is from Justice for Families. So, we know that systems have caused long-term harm by removing children instead of resourcing families. How can policy and practice shift towards building community knowledge, power, and resources so that families are supported before systems intervene?
I grab that one, April.
I was about to say it could be either one of us because I think we building it right.
We're building
And
it
going back to
together.
that co-creation piece, right? Like, you can actively advocate against the policies that you know is causing harm while at the same time like building that community knowledge. That's why we're working closely with Sarah students and the community, right? To get the know your rights out there, to it's small things that we can do. Oftentimes we look at the system is so huge, we have to change so much, when it's actually concrete things that we can do within that, right, to get the community to the point that is needed, right? And that's long before they touch those punitive systems. Going back to, if you need something, give it versus connecting people into these systems.
Yeah, and that's some of where we've been able to start experimenting with really collaborative work where sometimes, I'm working, a family has come to us because there's a legal issue that's popping up and I'm able to engage Philly Voice to help support that family in getting some of the resources they need while my students and I are working to resolve the legal issue so that that stays at bay, or vice versa, right? A family is coming to Philly Voice and then ending up coming to us. But I do want to flag that, like, by the time family separation has happened and things are involving court, like, often that is truly too late. And so it's why we've really broadened a lot of the legal advocacy that we're doing through the clinic. A lot of the folks that we're working with, never end up having a court case, and that's the goal, right? We never want it actually inside of a courtroom because that's where the harm is going to happen. And so that may look like more limited counseling or just resolving a question or helping someone file something or access another legal resource, but that's an important part of it as well.
Excellent. Thank you. A couple logistical questions in the Q&A. First and foremost, how can I share this presentation with people who've been impacted, struggling with family policing? I think we said we'll send around the slides after the fact in a post-event email.
And the
and that will likely
recording will be
include
available too.
Right. The recording will be available too, and then any other kinds of resources that were mentioned here today that the speakers want to share, we'll send those around as well. Next question comes from Rena McLean. Can you say more about what a savior complex is and how that can show up in this work?
Any one of us could jump in. I mean, I think Yolanda said a bit about it, and it's a theme we've continued to come back, that like intent is not enough, right? The idea that you are there and you are there to help, right? And I get this a lot, in my role teaching law students, right? So many people come to law school because they say they quote unquote want to help. They want to make the world better. But that intent is only going to get you so far. And that's where the savior complex comes in. If you're coming in with this idea, I'm going to save folks, my students know, I always stop them in their tracks if they say, well, my role is to advocate for my client's best interest. And I'll halt. Like, no, actually, your role is to advocate for what your client wants, right? And that is not what is quote unquote best, because that then is inserting your own subjective beliefs into that. And that's one of the ways in which that savior complex shows up in terms of the advocacy role, is starting to take our own beliefs and biases into how we approach what might be the appropriate course of action for the family. I don't know if there's anything else you guys want to say.
Yeah, you see that a lot, and like the best interest piece is the saviorism piece. Either way, because what you see is people coming from their own experiences, right? You may not understand how I can feed my house of three on 7.25 an hour, but I know how to make it happen, right? And when you have those like saviorism complexes, or you're trying to figure it out through your own lens instead of listening and actually working with the family within what they have, right? Then you can actually create harm while you're trying to save the family. You might actually put them in a worse off situation, because what may work for you may not work for them because they know their situation best.
I
Perfect.
think it's also important to recognize that when you're trying to save someone, you're not listening to the parents. I always tell people, as a parent advocate and even a child advocate, it's important to understand that they're a family unit and they know what works for them, what's best for them. Even when you place a child in foster care, the foster parent should be speaking to that parent because they know their child and what that child needs. If we were creating a system that works for the family, we would allow families to work within the system and not dictate how those families come together. And I think that's important. And I learned that in my role as both an attorney, but also a foster parent and an adoptive parent, that role is important. Understanding and keeping families together while within the system is important. And it's not always what others think is the best interest, but it's what's best for that particular family. So know the family, know the situation, and act accordingly is what I would always throw in.
And
Excellent.
make sure
Thank
they
you.
ask for you to help. Sometimes people
Right,
don't need saving. I didn't even ask for you to save me, right? I just want
right.
you to give me the resources to help ourselves. So that's how we kind of look at it as well.
And make sure that you give resources that don't have to go through these systems, because there are resources out there that help others that many people think they have to go through the system to get, when they're not necessarily there to help them, but there are resources that are meant to help.
Fantastic. Thank you. Next question comes from Nicole Strand, again, just paraphrasing for brevity. Can you all address the role of foster parents in this work? Can see if there's any other
I
pieces of
think
this
I'll
that would
take
be
that one,
useful.
given the fact
Please.
I've had experience as both a foster parent, kinship parent, and now adoptive parent. I think the one thing, and it got me in trouble in the beginning, but I still activate, I still am active in understanding this. I believe it takes two, I always say it takes the whole family to raise the family. I believe the system pins family foster parents against the birth parents, and understanding that you're as a foster parent, your role is to assist in the time of need because they placed them in your home. Not saying that the child needed to be there, because we don't know what the situation, every situation is different, but being active, I always say you're an extension of the village for that child, and by building that relationship, you ensure that when that child goes back, they still have a relationship and that family can actually reach out to you. um, and what I mean by that is I have a child that aged out, that I fostered. I have a great relationship with her mother. She has a great relationship with her sister, Sue, whom I still have, and they still have that constant. So that all we are is an extension of the family, and understanding that actually prevents, or it basically, it doesn't prevent harm because the harm has already been um it has already occurred, but what it does is reduce the harm. Because remember, we have to always try to reduce it, make the child comfortable within the home, and knowing, and the child knowing that they still have, they don't have to choose between the parent and the foster parent, but that they can have both of you guys because you're working together as friends. It actually creates and expands that village. They only have two families.
All right, thank you. Let's see here. For our next question comes from Nan Filer. How can people navigate the punitive mandatory reporting law around all of this, especially when working with young children and families?
So actually, and I'm the non-attorney though. Discretion is a thing, and there is a real split of what's reportable and what's not deemed reportable. And what you see is this influx of calls or report to child lines and to the family policing system that don't have to be there. You see it because a child may look disheveled. I've heard it because, the house has roaches, or there may be a certain need. Like those things are not necessarily reportable. Sometimes, we kind of check the box and say, well, I did the thing, right? I made the phone call because I had to, without actually sitting down and asking yourself, is this one of those things that's reportable? Is this child in immediate risk? Is this child in danger? Is this a poverty issue? If it's something that could be handled with a tangible resource or finances, right? Think it through, right? Because you do see the overburdening of calls coming in, and be mindful that over 80% of those calls go nowhere, right? So you have 80% calls coming in that's not reportable, that absolutely goes nowhere, don't even get investigated, but we're taking real resources from focusing on what really needs to be focused in on, because people don't understand when to report and when not to report, and you go by follow your gut when everyone's gut is biased. My gut is different than your gut, right? So I do kind of challenge people to kind of check yourself and really think before you make that phone call, to ask yourself, why am I making this phone call? Or am I making it so I feel better? Because most people do think they make that phone call, this family is going to get help and resources. So you're removed out of the equation instead of, is there a phone call that I can make, right? Like if it's clothes that's needed, can I connect to them somebody to get clothes? I saw Sarah plenty of times. I got a listserv in my neighborhood going around. I can put it on my listserv, right? Like to really ask those type of questions prior to those phone calls.
Yeah. I mean, I would just add that, one, nationally, lots of family-led organizations are calling for an end to mandatory reporting, not an end to reporting outright, but an end to making it the mandate. But one of the reasons that that becomes a demand is because it creates a culture where it's report first and ask questions later, right? And our colleague and fearless advocate Joyce McMillan has formed this notion of mandatory support versus mandatory reporting. But just what April is talking about, right? That are we asking questions, right? Are we starting with just sort of saying like, what do you need? What's going on? Or are we just picking up the phone and reporting? And I think some of where we also need some work, and some of what some of the training and work we've been collaborating on is starting to better educate mandatory reporters about what happens on the other end of that call. Because I think many mandatory reporters know that they're mandatory reporters, are fearful of the consequences of not making the call, but aren't very well educated about what might happen to the family. And we know that that just that initial knock at the door, just the beginnings of an investigation, causes harm to families. And so we really need a lot of better education about the impact of that call. And we'll keep working on that together.
I was also
Fantastic.
saying, and working in collaboration with other organizations that Philly Voice work with, working with doctors, and who have made the report, and they've asked, like, well, not recognizing, what they found out is that when they made the report, the help that they were seeking for the family never got. So when you're thinking about mandatory reporting, you got to think about what resources the people you believe they need, and determine whether or not making that report gets them those resources, or just navigating or giving those resources to the family directly. There are, like I said, there's community resources outside of the phone call. And if you don't know that those resources can give the family what they need, I think you will refer them to those, because that is, yes, you're reporting per se, but you're getting them what they need, not separating the family based on a report. Because a lot of times, mandated reporters, especially doctors, don't realize how much power their report has when they're actually seeking out help for that family. It doesn't lead to help. It actually generally leads to separation, which was probably never their goal in the first place.
Thank you. Well, I know we're starting to press up on time here, so we're going to do one more question and then we'll close it out. And again, if you've submitted a question today, we weren't able to answer it, we'll make sure the speakers have access to that question after the fact. So on the flip side of things, what advice or guidance do you have for families that are facing investigation and removal from with the courts?
I mean, we can talk
Call
about
us.
what?
Call Temple.
Yeah, call us. I mean, that's a lot of the work that I mean, a piece of the work that we are doing together. And our clinic provides legal advice and representation during the investigation stage, during safety plans. But this is where a lot of the collaborative work happens. Is the reality. We've had a lot of early success of collaborating together at that very early stage of family policing involvement for the family, and figuring out like what is actually the problem, right? And trying to avoid things escalating to the point of getting court involved. Community Legal Services does great work around early defense as well. But there are limited legal resources in Philadelphia to assist families when they are going through that stages before things escalate to the moment of court involvement. And that's why having more resources, not just legal, but also community care at that stage, is so critically important.
I think like I know with us, we offer FAM, so that way if we can't beat it before they get involved in the system or while they're going through, they actually have a mentor to walk through it with them. So they're not in that fight alone.
And also advocate for. We know the ins and outs of those meetings and what DHS is asking for and things like that. So we can possibly alleviate the issue before it even, gets too far.
Excellent. Well, thank you all. To close us out for some closing remarks, I'm going to bring on Stoneleigh's Director of Communications, Anne-Marie McCrory.
Thank you so much, Mark. As Mark said, I'm Anne-Marie McCrory, the Communications Director at the Stoneleigh Foundation. And on behalf of the Foundation staff and board, I'd like to thank our truly outstanding speakers today, Sarah Katz, April Lee, and Yolanda Houston, for participating in this afternoon's powerful and really informative dialogue. You've given us a clear framework and a real roadmap for, I think, true community partnership, collaboration, and co-creation. And Stoneleigh is really honored to play a role in supporting this work that you all are leading here in Philadelphia. And in particular, I felt very struck by the way that you lead with and center and ground your work in values and principles of humility, curiosity, imagination, solidarity. I think in addition to all of the tactical strategies you've given us today, I think many of us will be walking away really reflecting on those values in our individual and collective work. We, as has been mentioned a couple of times, will be sharing a recording of this webinar with all registrants later this week, so please feel free to share it with colleagues who were not able to join us today. In addition, Stoneleigh will be hosting a number of upcoming events throughout the winter and spring, so please do look out for those invitations for these opportunities in the coming months. And with that, I'd like to thank everyone in our audience for joining us today, and we hope to see you at our next event. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.